there is a very special kind of magic that happens when you bring together people of multiple generations to create together, to learn together, and to play together. So for me, this just feels like the absolute perfect formula for creating connection and joy between those generations, and there's no better magic than that. So with this particular project, it just wrapped up at the end of the school year, and in fact, the last Friday of the school year, we were able to have a Zoom gathering, which was better than nothing, bringing all of the members of these creative teams together to do a screening of the videoed performances. But getting a little ahead, started at the end. Anyway, so to back things up, there were 150 people involved in this project, ranging in age from 8 to 90 plus years. So lots of people to coordinate, and a variety of roles that those people played. So the project actually got kicked off with the residents from Fairhaven Long-Term Care, and there were about 50 residents who fully participated in the months of October and November, and that is when the stories were created that became the whole foundation of the project. I've done many projects before where we've used life stories because the population is just so rich with their own stories. But in this particular project, chose to go with, rather than tapping into memory, with just tapping into imagination. For many people, especially with varying degrees of dementia, that really creates a safe sort of environment. They're not putting themselves under pressure or worried about what they're remembering or not remembering, or, oh, did they get that right? So we tapped into imagination, and there were absolutely no wrong answers. So in that 2 months that I went in, I was bringing in my pictures, and I would ask them as a group, and the group sizes would be anywhere from one-on-one to maybe 5 or 6 people in the room. And I would say, which of these pictures would you like to make up a story about today? And usually it was pretty easy to decide on which one, and if it had to be both, then we did 2 stories, no problem. And so it was just simply through using those prompts just to get things started, to get the conversations going. And as I said, there are no wrong answers, and it was all about imagination. And it would start with something as easy as, what would you like to call this guy? Or even, what is that this person was holding? And whatever they responded back to me, I had a big flip chart, markers, and I wrote everything down exactly as I was told. Because it was also really important to me that I was honoring what their voices, what they were saying. And so I would write it down, and the momentum would build, and the energy would build, and before you know it, I'd be on my 5th page of the flip chart, and as we went along, reading back to them, what we had so far, and just filling in gaps together until we came up with some pretty weird stories, but really fun stories. Well, and they loved it. They just loved the process. They loved correcting my spelling and my grammar. But I think they also loved knowing that those stories were then going on to become more. So those stories then went to about 50 grade 3 and 4 students at Edmondson Heights Public School. And those students, through collage, created like the backgrounds. The 18 by 12, that's just foam core cut to size, and using tissue paper and all sorts of different types of paper, and a ton of materials that I would bring into the classroom with me. They had a copy of the story. So it turned out usually 2 students working together on one background for one story. So they knew ahead of time, what the story was about. And then in the new year, the stories and the backgrounds then went to grade 5 and 6 students. And they really had a huge role in all that came after that. So the grade 5, 6 students would then, they created these little desktop puppet stages, and the backgrounds just, slide right in. So, nice and easy to put that in, and they would decorate the rest of the stage. And then we chose to make these little rod puppets. And so as a puppeteer, they'd have the stage in front of them, and then they would perform it like from above. So the rods, come from the tops of the heads. The characters, particularly the human characters, also had arm rods, but most of them have either been removed or shortened, just so that the stages aren't full of wire. And they learned, puppetry techniques, and basically brought those stories to life that were created by the seniors. And then ultimately, we're able to perform it back on video through Zoom. But it still was still a great way to create that connection, and to really have fun, and to be very playful, and to make those connections. So all of this was funded by a grant from the Ontario Arts Council. Thank you, Ontario Arts Council. Many places, pretty much any place, never builds money into their budgets to do this kind of project. So the only way I'm ever able to do these intergenerational projects is when I get a grant. And the Arts Council has been incredibly good to me. But I was writing the grant application in April of 2021. Schools were closed. The long-term care homes were all in lockdown. Nobody could go anywhere. And I thought, okay, this is about building connection, creating together. Well, how do I do this? So it felt like writing two scenarios for it. Well, if we have to do it virtually, it'll look like this. If we actually get to do any of it in person, then it would look like this. And ultimately, it ended up being kind of a combination of both those scenarios. But because I didn't know, and just because of COVID, I opted to go small in terms of the staging and puppets, just because we're not in a time where large audiences was necessarily a good thing. And if the students weren't in school and were learning virtually, then they could, in fact, do the project at home. And I made lots and lots of video tutorials and did a lot of stuff live. But by the time the grade 5s and 6s came in with the major part of their part of the creating, I was able to be in the classrooms, although there were cohorts, and I would be in the school all day, and I would have the grade 5 class for half of the day, which ended right in the middle of a block. And then I had to move myself and all of the stuff to a different portable, and have the other half of the day with the grade 6 students. So it was a crazy way to work. And all of the students had to be in the classroom. There, as with a lot of schools, space is really a problem. So, 24 students and teachers and myself trying to do something that I would normally love to just give them a ton of space to do. Even when it came to filming the puppet shows, I did it in a storage closet. Literally, it was crazy, and I thought, there was hardly enough room for anybody to even move. But hey, you work with what you get, whatever's given, and we did it. Like, it feels like it was a very successful project despite all of the obstacles. And I think the real sort of affirmation of that was when we did finally get together through Zoom, and to see those interactions, the questions. But through all of this, all parts of these creative teams were in communication with each other. They were writing letters to one another. I was sharing photographs of, where we're at in the process now. So I think through the whole thing, everybody continued to feel like they were a part of something. And they had their own team. And those teams ranged anywhere from 3 people in total to 15 people in total. And that would depend a little bit on how many people showed up on any given day when we were creating stories, or how many puppet characters ended up being in the puppet show. Because every student made at least one puppet. And they were also the ones who performed with that puppet. But, we had all those other collage artists and people as part of the creative teams as well. So in a nutshell, that's how the project unfolded, how it came about in the first place. And now I get to show it to people, which is wonderful. So the stories are all on YouTube, and you can see, we have little QR codes on there that if you want to watch the show for a particular stage while you're here, you're able to do that. But you can also certainly check them out in your own time, in your own place. The written versions of the stories are here, at least some of them are. I have more work to do. Still working on that. I'll have it done by the time it's next. But the book will live at Fairhaven at the end of it, so that residents can continue to enjoy the stories that way, and also have access to the videos. Are there any questions? Brad?
How long did you have with the students to create the puppets themselves?
Yeah.
Different amount.
Great question. So I was going into the school once a week, every week, almost every week, and it ended up that 4 of those, 10 weeks in total, were spent on the making of the puppets. That, I didn't expect it to take that long, but it did. Now, I've made a lot of rod puppets before, but I also was using, I'd never made them in this style, and it seemed like a very doable style to use, but oh my gosh, it was messy. And there were no sinks in the portables. So it was glue and tissue paper and rolled up paper, and of course glue takes a long time to dry. So it ended up really taking 4 half days with each of those classes for the puppets to be close to what you could call complete. Oh, the other thing that I just wasn't, it was totally off my radar, is their jointed puppets, and which meant stringing the parts together, and I didn't anticipate that being a problem, but it was a problem. Oh my God, it was a problem. Tying knots and the knots not holding.
Yep.
So the whole thing falls apart. So that was a little more frustrating than and finicky than what I had anticipated, and added to the length of time. Some of these characters, as you're walking around and looking at them, you notice that their stringing has been replaced with pipe cleaners, which is not quite as flexible, but oh, so much easier. so as needed, we are always shifting gears. Yeah, and then when in the weeks that they weren't focused primarily on the puppet characters, they were working on the stages, they were working on performing, rehearsing, and all of this during a time of really high absenteeism rates, both for students and for teachers. But hey, I think not only schools, but long-term care homes too, so much could be enhanced if their technology was better. There were 3 weeks, you'll probably remember it, when the mask mandate had been removed, and when absenteeism in schools oftentimes was more than 50%. And there were 3 weeks that I said, I'm not coming. Like I can't be in a portable with 26 people, even if everybody's masked. I guess it wouldn't be 26 if half of them are missing, but that's a problem too, when everybody then is at different points. But I wanted to be able to offer those workshops virtually. Like I would be on Zoom, they would be in the classroom, so that we could still move forward. And even though I was assured that the technology was in place when I took them on as an educational partner, when it came down to actually needing to do that, it wasn't doable. And the same with long-term care homes. I was lucky that in October and November I could go in, but with people being understaffed, with the added obstacles of keeping people well and safe during the pandemic, having that opportunity to communicate at least through Zoom or whatever, it wasn't doable either. So there were lots of things that I thought could have happened that weren't able to happen. But hey, if nothing else, we've all learned how to roll with the punches. And roll we did. Yeah. Yes.
When you were doing the story writing, was that like one-on-one with an older adult, or was it like a small group? And were the stories created individually or collaboratively?
Well, a little bit of both. So for some residents, they either weren't able to come to an activity room or just didn't want to. Either way, but in those cases, if they were good with me coming and sitting with them, then some of the stories were created one-on-one. Like the fashion bear, well, you can tell if there's only one starring puppet in the show, that was a one-on-one project. That's something else I should perhaps touch on too. So originally, there are actually 36 stories, but by the time we got to the grade 5 and 6 stage of things, where they were having to make all of these puppets, make all of these stages, and it was clear that, okay, they're not going to be doing it virtually, so they don't each have to have their own stage. The number of stories that became puppet shows was reduced to 18 in order to make it more manageable. But I have 36 stories. So that's one reason too why I'm putting them together in a book, so that all of those stories can be read and honored. And actually, I've got very convincing photos that go with each story. So this one, as an example, Dog Day Afternoon, didn't get made into a puppet show, but the puppets were going to be doing double duty. So the puppets all still existed, and the grade 3 students who were doing the collage settings, they had already done their work for each story. So, you know, the story is illustrated. It's not a puppet show, but it's illustrated and looks like a puppet show, and you can imagine it as a puppet show. Use your imagination, there's no wrong answers. So it did have to, you know, that was one of the changes, was reducing the number of finished puppet shows.
So there are some that were written by more than one older adult?
Yes, so I think the biggest group of people, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Fairhaven. Anybody? Yeah, so in the one floor is the special needs unit, and that's the people who are furthest along in with dementia of one kind or another and need a lot of extra care. But oh my gosh, what an enthusiastic group. And they just, you know, there would sometimes be 10 or 12 people coming in and everybody contributing to the story. And the other thing that would happen is I went in every week, not necessarily on the same floor or the same wing every week, but I was doing like 2 workshops each time I went in. And as time went on, it was more and more of the same people would come before, because they were really getting into the swing of things, and it's like, oh yeah, I want to make another story. Sometimes it would be a group of 5 people, and 3 of them might be asleep in their wheelchairs, and 2 would be doing it, or even just 1 would be doing it. So it was a real mix. It was a real mixed bag. And as with any kind of gathering of people, who's there really affects the dynamic of how things go. I'm going to tell you a story about one of these. What were they up to? Which is demonstrated over there near the door. 2 gentlemen, Ron and Dan. It was the only story that I had to censor it. These 2 characters, it's like, boy, when you say there's no wrong answers, you have to be careful. It's like, okay, I asked for this. But sex, oh my goodness, and murder and explosions and bank robberies, and it was like, okay, we can keep some of the violence in there, but we're not doing sex. So these are grade 5, 6 students, you can't go there. But you didn't know what was going to come out. But it was always so much fun. And yeah. No, it was great.
And then did you go back to Fairhaven and show them the videos of the? Have they had an opportunity to see their story brought to life?
Yes. So that last Friday of the school year, when we did our big Zoom gathering, the residents at Fairhaven were able to go to the boardroom, which has, you know, a big screen. So the puppet shows were all screened for the first time together as a group. So not only did the residents get to see their story brought to life at that point, but the puppeteers got to see it too. Because as a puppeteer, you never really quite get that audience perspective unless it's filmed. So that was fun too. And yeah, but staff at Fairhaven have also been great in visiting, you know, going into the rooms, particularly the activities staff, letting them, bringing in the tablets so that they can see. And yes, I don't know how many residents actually have their own tablets, but I'm hoping that they're also being given the opportunity to share those with families, you know, with their families and friends. Yeah,
That'd be neat.
yeah, yeah.
With the story, so you'd go in a particular day and you'd have whoever was there. Would you come back to finish a story, or would it all be done in the one visitor sitting?
It would be all done in one visitor sitting,
Right.
and that would take generally anywhere from a half an hour to an hour. Well, and sometimes over an hour, because if they were really rolling, and I mean, it's like, is this going to become a full-length novel? You might have to kind of find a way to wrap it up.
Yeah.
But it often naturally started to come to a conclusion, after 45, 60 minutes. But it would, it would go pretty quick and, get really fast and writing on flip charts. Why there were so many spelling mistakes. That's my story.
Well, shall we let everyone bring this to a close and let everyone
Yeah,
enjoy
so by all
something?
means. So please take a look. I hope you're able to pick up some of that magic I was talking about.
Thank you,
Taking
Shelley.
a look.